Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Good evening, afternoon, or morning. This is Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. And with this show, we go into our final live 2-hour broadcast of the year and the second anniversary of our being here on KGRA, and knocking out about 100 or so shows and going on to the next few hundred. It's a privilege for me to do this in that I get to ask questions that I've always wanted to ask people, and in many cases ask of myself. We go into this last show on the day after Christmas, Boxing Day in the UK, but in my family, always my mother's birthday. And my mom departed about 24 years ago next week, as it turns out. I want to dedicate this show to her because it is her birthday, and because I'm one of those rare people who had a chance to say goodbye in every sense to their mother, and a reminder that you never know what's coming at you next. My mom was born in Queens, New York in 1927, a Russian Jewish emigre family. Grew up there, married my dad, World War II. Had 3 children, the first of which is here. And if that baby does strike you as extra cute, which I expect it will, that is me. That is my mom later. Her during her years of working for the Nikon Corporation and becoming quite a mover and shaker in the American photographic business. And her and my dad on a break from the United Nations UFO General Assembly Committee meeting. How's that for mom and dad? And another nice photo of her. Anyway, I was very lucky to have her as a parent, and she was the first person who read to me, as was traditional at one point in culture, and I guess contributed greatly to my becoming a reader. What I've done for this show is decide reading is that important to me that I wanted to do a show on it, on writers, on why we read, on what we love to read, and go forward from there. So I've drawn together a number of friends in the studio and hopefully on their way here. Before going on to introduce them, though, a special shout out to friends in the Buffalo, New York area. Buffalo, as many of you know, has been hit by a millennial storm, and where my area, a scant 2 hours drive below, a couple inches of snow, 0 degrees, 20-degree wind chill at night, minus. They're hit by 5 feet of snow, gales, and 25, 30 dead at this moment. So Vincent and Robert, I'm glad your mom is safe there. Best to you all, and hope you're tuning in tonight. With that, we go to the guests in the studio who are... Well, all right. In 1991, Greg Bishop co-founded a magazine called The Excluded Middle, which was a journal of UFOs, conspiracy, research, psychedelia, and new science. Wake up down there, a collection of articles from the magazines, was published in 2000 by Adventure Unlimited Books Press. In a way, I met Greg, as we do a number of writers, through their work before I actually met him. His second book, a very important one to me, was Project Beta, the story of Paul Benowitz's national security and the creation of a modern UFO myth, which documents a government campaign of disinformation perpetrated against an unsuspecting UFO citizen. His bio is, like all of them, extraordinary. For 2 years, he hosted The Hungry Ghost, a radio show of interviews and music aired on pirate FM radio. He is a licensed to fly aerial drones for commercial clients and is a certified paraglider and ultralight pilot, as well as holding a private pilot's license. And is Steve Aspen in the city with us yet? No. Okay. And when I say extraordinary bios, I mean it in every respect. My 3 friends I'm about to bring in are not colleagues from UFO paranormal research as much as just friends who are very special to me, and all avid readers like myself. After 20 years service in the U.S. Coast Guard, retired out in 1999, then 15 years with U.S. Postal Service as a letter carrier, retired out in 2014, Scott Santa has been hanging out since with his wife of almost 42 years and 2 beautiful daughters and grandkids, as well as 3 dogs, catching up on reading and enjoying his post-work years immensely, as well deserved. Stephen Pakula is a publishing industry veteran of over 20 years, with roles ranging from sales to editorial to production and manufacturing, and specializing in comic books, graphic novels, and entertainment IP. For the last 12 years, he's worked at Penguin Random House, where he is currently an associate director of production for 2 award-winning lines of Japanese graphic novels and art books. He is also a professional mentor at Comics Experience, and that is comicsexperience.com, an online school for comic book writers and artists. My friend Tim Warenko has the power of 11 flaming ninjas, not 12, but he's working on it. He speaks 31 languages incomprehensibly. He is 13 feet tall. Turn-ons include Jedi mind tricks and Sasquatch poetry. Turn-offs include fascism and wet socks. Also, he is a writer, director, producer, and the CEO of 3 Beep, a production company in New York City that makes stuff. Welcome, Scott, Greg, Stephen, and Tim. And the partridge in a pear tree.
Guys?
Hi, you guys.
Good evening.
Glad to be here. I love the pipe. The pipe, it bespeaks the literary nature of our conversation. I wish I had a smoking jacket or something.
It's all part of the green screen experience here. I'm not really wearing this. And it's a very old polar fleece and a red scarf. The propane has the temperature down. It is almost explosive to have all of you in the same room at the same time, knowing you from different parts of our lives. And now that we're here, we're going to talk books. And we're going to do it in different ways. We're going to zip through this time like there's nobody's business. I'm going to get the ball rolling just because I can, and this is not a democracy, and pull out the very first book by chance I read this year. And part of it, and let us all have the liberty to go off on tangents here. As a kid growing up in Long Island, New York City as well, that dream of exploration and being out there in the world and having adventures starting at a certain point in your life, like you're reading about in some of these books, polar exploration, north or south, fascinated me in the daring do, and you're putting yourself up against God and nature, and it's insane, and there's glory, and it's madness. It's a certain kind of madness, and it's a noble pursuit as well. The book is The Endurance. Shackleton's Legendary Antarctic Experience by Caroline Alexander. I had read a number of books with things about the leader of this expedition, which is about 1914 and 15, Ernest Shackleton. And it sounded like what he had done was impossible, but he did it. And I want to bring in Scott here because on my recommendation almost a year ago, he got the book and he read it too, but has experience in the Coast Guard that put him in a different place with the book. It seems impossible that Shackleton was able to save these men and to do it in a way that showed extraordinary human understanding for the increasing stress they were under. Your thoughts on reading the book?
Well, let me preface what I'm going to say by saying I spent a couple of years on a ship in Alaska and have sailed the entire Aleutian chain out into the Bering Sea, in and out of all the islands of the Aleutians.
I did not know that about you.
Oh, yeah. And then spent a lot of time. You guys ever watched The Greatest, what's it called? The Greatest Catch? Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've boarded a lot of those ships. I was a boarding officer on board, as well as my other duties as a telecommunications. So having had to pull in quite a number of times out there and chip ice and shovel it over the side, we got a 8-degree list to one side or the other. And, you can only be out there for 15 minutes. You had to rotate crews to go out there and chip and shovel. And I just, wooden ships and iron men comes to mind. I can't imagine that doing on a wooden sailing ship. It was bad enough being on an iron boat.
Their boat slowly gets crushed in the ice in the middle of all nowhere.
It's incredible.
And they should 27 men or so. It's beyond superhuman. We use superstar, pop culture terms, superheroes. This man was all that and more. He was very human and certainly flawed. And one fact stuck with me. I think it was known when I recommended the book, and we'll go on in a moment, but the ship itself, based on the written longitude and latitude that the captain put in the log, which managed to escape with the men, boats went back there for years. And working with those numbers, they found the ship like 2 miles down on the 100th anniversary of the day that Shackleton died. Just a little. So, Tim.
Yes.
You actually work
Did
hard.
I read this book? Yes, I read that book.
I
also
would like to know your opinion of that book.
I also read Shackleton's own diary of that. But I think the best version was the one written by Alfred Lansing, which is the first one that I read on that story. But this one was also just one of the crew members, and this one was autographed by him. So
did you guys somehow conspire behind my back? I have never been so totally overturned, flummoxed, surprised on my own show of more than 100 broadcasts. Now, Tim, you have any opinion on this stuff now that you've read the books on it?
I do. It is an amazing story. I became really fascinated with it. It's as
how did you become so fascinated with the subject?
I don't know how I first stumbled upon it, but the first one I read was Endurance by Alfred Lansing, and there's no pictures in it. The one that you read has lots of photographs.
Yeah, and high quality too.
It's amazing. They're truly, truly amazing. But I read this, and this kind of blew my mind.
Wow.
And then, I don't know if any of you guys were around for this or not, but at the Museum of Natural History 20 plus years ago, they had the 18-foot wooden boat that they actually used to sail to Elephant Island.
Yeah.
Like, it was extraordinary. And they had a sextant in the room, and like all around the room was like there was like a video image of the seas, like what it would be like out in the ocean.
Oh, Christ.
And they gave you instructions on how to use a sextant and like, okay, how'd you do? And then it did a little computation, and it just was, it's an extraordinary thing that that any of them survived more than 30 minutes. It's an incredible tale.
It is.
Before we went on the air, talking to Scott, remembering that we always forget, well, if you know the story, you forget that there was one life lost, and it was a life that the captain had to decide was going to be sacrificed because it would not make it. And that was Mrs. Chippy, the cat.
Yeah.
And that cat was the beloved mascot of the ship, but the pet of, I think, the cook. And the enmity.
I think if Steve was the captain of the ship, the cat would have made it. But I think
100%.
We would have eaten you, Peter.
We leave no cat behind.
That brings me right to you, Steve, which is you specifically zoned in on 4 books this year. And I want to bring up the first one, which I just, again, the cover is perfection itself.
That's it. This is 5 Decembers. And as you can see, it's part of the Hard Case Crime series.
Yeah.
It's a line of books that are sort of a throwback to the old noirish titles of the 50s and the 40s. And some of the books that are published in this line are actually from that time, that are, for the first time in decades, being reissued and republished under this banner. This is an original novel by James Kester. I believe it's a pseudonym. And it was one of the best books that I've read this year. It was truly phenomenal. It is, the cover is very evocative. You can sort of figure out or guess, what the feeling is just from the cover. It's about a police officer in around Pearl Harbor. Literally, the story takes place like days before the attack on Pearl Harbor. And there's a murder mystery, and things happened aside from the attack, and he finds himself in Japan for 5 years. And then he comes back to Pearl Harbor to try to solve this case. It's wonderful. It's very, I hate to say this, but it's very well written. But it grabs you immediately. I highly recommend this for not just fans of detective stories or noir stories, but just of books in general. I think you would really enjoy it.
Excellent. I want to say that I am a longtime mystery fan, but particularly police detective material when I was younger, and graduated into wonderful World War II espionage as far as I was concerned, and the best of it still is. But Cold War fiction really captured my imagination, I guess, starting in the 80s. And my all-time favorite author, who passed about 2 years ago, I think, whose work continues to just amaze me as I move forward, is come on, Peter.
You got this, my friend. You got this.
John le Carré. And it's as if I'm being brought into deeply the worlds of other people. You master of what he does, takes you deeper into the psyches and the dark motivations. Also, if you love England, it just jumps off the page. Breaking ranks again. Greg, as far as your fiction and nonfiction reading, what book do you first want to talk about?
Probably my favorite book of all time that I've read probably 10 times over the years. Yeah, there's 2 that I go back to. One of them is this Cabeza de Vaca story, the guy that was shipwrecked in Florida in the 15th century and contacted all these tribes before anybody had ever seen them. He was the first non-native person they'd ever seen. And he wandered around in the United States. What was North America would become the United States for like 13 years. And then he finally made it into Mexico and got back to Spain and wrote it all up. And it's the most amazing story ever. My other one is this book.
You can't
Can't win.
By Jack Black, which is a pseudonym. He was a petty criminal that lived between the 19th and 20th centuries. And this is his autobiography. When he decided to not be a criminal anymore, he had a wealthy mentor that said, if you'll stay out of jail, I will make sure that you get a job and that you don't have to have a life of crime anymore. And, you know, maybe you can write a book about what you've experienced. And he did. And basically, it's a look at the underside of American society from the late 19th to early 20th centuries, from the point of view of a criminal and somebody that was traveling with other criminals, bank robbers, safe crackers, house burglars, and how he made his living doing that until he just finally got tired of being thrown in jail so many times, because he got caught probably 10% of the time, but those 10% he spent a lot of time in jail for. So I actually, the reason I like this writing is, one, because of what I've just described, and two, it's very strange that kind of that late 19th century, early 20th century writing is not how people write or speak anymore. It seems to me in a lot of ways more evocative, not just of the time, but just in using the English language. I mean, my other favorite here, which I might talk about, is Jack London's John Barleycorn, which is, and I found that it's a first edition, this one, which was very nice to find. Is it okay for me to read like 3 or 4 paragraphs from this? Because it's amazing.
Please do. And I hope that precedent will follow through for some of the rest of us. Go for it.
Yeah, I've bookmarked all these just in case there was time. So this is talking about robbing a house. And this is what Black writes. You're a burglar. You put in a week tabbing up a residence. You decide to make it. It looks all right. No children. You haven't seen a dog. The night arrives. You jump into the yard. It's 2 o'clock. This is 2 a.m. You look the house over. Every door and window fastened. Not even an open coal hole. No porch to go up. You go back to the kitchen window and perform a very delicate operation, taking a pane of glass out piece by piece. Then you put your hand in, release the catch, and raise the window slowly and noiselessly. You find inside the windowsill bottles, boxes, corkscrews, can openers, and a toothbrush. These you pick up one at a time and place outside below the window. Now, this is just the suspense. Now you're in the window and you find that below, inside is a kitchen sink. You get in without disturbing the dishes or pans and open the kitchen door, so you'll have a getaway in case anything causes you to hurry out. You've been almost an hour getting in the house and you haven't even started on the job yet. It's very dark in the house, but you light no matches, nor do you use a flashlight. You're an expert. You know your business. Your years at this work have developed a cat sense in you. You can sense an object in front of you without seeing or feeling it. You can feel your way slowly, silently in the dining room. Your eyes are getting accustomed to the dark and you distinguish a few objects, tables, chairs, a sideboard. You sit in a chair and remove your shoes, shoving them down your back pockets, heels up. You are going upstairs where the sleepers and valuables are. You button your coat and pull your hat down over your eyes to hide your face from the sleeper should he wake up on you and switch on a light. It takes you 15 minutes to get up the stairs. They creak frightfully and you must find solid places to put your weight. You know your business, so you keep as close to the banister as possible where the step boards are nailed down tight and can't shift and creak. You know the creaking won't wake sleeping people, but you don't know whether they're asleep. If they should be lying in bed awake, they would know what the creaking means and you might get shot. Now you're at a bedroom door. It's latched but not locked. You take hold of the doorknob in a certain way and turn it slowly till it won't turn any farther. The hall you're in is dark and dead silent. You push the door open an inch and you can hear the gentle, regular up and down breathing of a healthy sleeper. You wait a long time, maybe 5 minutes, with your hand on the doorknob, listening intently. Yes, there are 2 sleepers in the room. Then out of this awful silence comes a coughing from a room at the back of the hall. You stiffen and your hand goes to your coat pocket. You hear a glass clink against a pitcher and you know a man is awake. You hear him turn over in bed, straighten out for another sleep. You remain rigid for another 5 minutes and feel your way down the dark hall to make sure he's gone back to sleep. His door is ajar and now he's snoring. You wish he wouldn't snore. He might wake up somebody else. He might wake himself. Snorers do wake themselves. The expert burglar doesn't fancy the heavy snorer. He likes the sleeper that wheezes gently, softly, and regularly. You feel your way back to the front room. You want that first. That's where you've decided the best stuff is to be found. Your hand is on the doorknob again. You open the door another inch, slowly and noiselessly. Almost done. Now something soft yielding obstructs it. This thing that softly blocks the door is probably a rug or an article of clothing. That's easy. You release the doorknob, stoop slowly, and put your hand around inside. Yes, it's a rug. It's a fur rug. You nip a few strands of your hair in your fingers and tug at it gently. The thing comes to life with a scared howl that turns your blood to ice water. You jump up, pull the door shut with a bang, and hasten to the top of the stairs with sure and certain step. It took you 15 minutes to ascend the stairway. You know every inch of it. You straddle the banister and slide down. It's quicker and safer. In the dining room, you slam the door shut, and none too soon. The man upstairs has released the big mastiff, and he's roaring at the dining room door. Made no mistake when you left the kitchen door open. You dash through it, pulling it behind you just as the man inside opens the dining room door for his dog. You take the back fence, tearing your clothes. The big dog is in the backyard now. You hear his ferocious growls plainer than ever. You run into a vacant lot toward the next street. You hear the master urging his dog to follow you, but he's too well trained and refuses to leave his own yard. I mean, that's a movie scene. I mean, you can see everything that's going on in there. You can hear people breathing. You can hear the person doing the robber breathing, everything that's going on. It's just absolutely spellbinding. And the whole book's like that. I mean, it's written with such a good, idea of how, what I really like, Peter and everybody, is an economy of words that evoke far more than just the words.
Yeah.
You can use 5 words and you've got an entire picture out of those 5 words.
Yeah.
And that's what this is like.
The title is You Can't Win?
Yeah, by Jack Black. It was
Okay.
William F. Burroughs' favorite book.
There's a recommendation right there. Tim Orenko, would you jump in and take us into another world of a book that you read and loved this year?
Sure. I read several books, and there's a bunch that I love, but piggybacking on a little bit of what he said, I didn't pull anything aside to do any readings, but it's a bit of a cliche to talk about how great Moby Dick is. And it's long and it's really boring. And it's it was written for an audience that didn't have any distractions. It was written for an audience, most of whom would probably never, ever see the ocean in their entire lives. And I read Moby Dick. This is my 4th time reading it. I read it this year.
Oh my gosh.
And so this is what my project was, whenever you read it, there's long stretches that are boring as hell. I am not going to be apologetic about this. There are long philosophical stretches of hundreds of pages debating whether or not a whale is a fish or an animal. It goes on and on. There are great, and every one of them are filled with beautiful passages of incredible use of language. Melville was a very accomplished writer by the time he wrote. This wasn't his first freshman year effort. But I read it this year 2 pages a day. So every day I would just read 2 pages so that you don't get into this thing where your eyes sort of can glaze over, or you're like, yeah, that's a weird, and just
taking a child through the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Yeah, you could just sort of take your time and be like, okay, listen, I'm just reading just 2 pages. That's all I'm doing. So I read 2 pages a day, and I just really took my time reading Moby Dick. And it's one of those, there's no surprises. Everyone knows the story. I knew everything because I'd read it before. We've all seen the movie or the movies or whatever it is. The plot is relatively thin. It's relative, it's not like a surprising story, but the characters, the insights into humanity and the universe, it's extraordinary. It deserves every bit of cliched, grandiose discussion of it that it gets. It's that good, and so I'm glad I did that. But that was a book that, and I just brought it up because he was mentioning how things were written with a different sensibility, and I think about that because Steve was talking about the Pulp Fiction stuff that came along, and there is this thing that happens around the 40s where movies and then television start to become a competition for storytelling, and you get shorter, quicker novels no one spends time describing, what a thing is. People know what it is. There's an expectation. And so things move along. It's a focus on pacing instead of the descriptive nature of things. So I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. It's just kind of how the universe works. So there's plenty of modern novels that I love dearly. There's plenty of old novels that I love dearly for different reasons. But one of the great things is it just sort of lets you, it pulls you back into a different mindset. And we live in a world that moves really quickly. So it's every once in a while, it's nice to slow down a little bit.
I, like you guys, sometimes return to beloved favorites of the past or a period of time that I'm particularly enamored with, post-war era in part. And remember that some great old-fashioned novels, many of which became films, and some of them good films, were out there that I'd never read. And because I love films and they inform my reading to such a degree, I have gravitated in my life toward books that later became well-known films. And one that I remember when it came out in the 1960s, I think, The Young Lions, which is a story of three intersecting lives, two American, one Italian-American entertainment industry, the other a poor Jewish American, the other a German, and how their lives slowly come together at a certain moment at the end of World War II. It's so well written. The characters are created with such depth because it's the nature of the novel's structure. It's written by Irving Shaw, who was a classic blockbuster, best-selling author of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I reread a book. It was one of the first Cold War books I ever read when it came out. It was a major bestseller in the United States in the early 60s, and it was made into a film that absolutely was about as good as a film treatment can get, and that is Failsafe. And
Yeah.
I'm guessing you've all seen the film. Henry Fonda's characterization of the president's unforgettable, and the slow motion tragedy that we're seeing unfold it's absolutely paradigm shifting. But the book, of course, it gives you nowhere to run. There are no commercials. You don't escape into saying, gee, that actor really is doing a great job. And I just recommend them both. Failsafe was written by Eugene Burdick and Harvey Wheeler. And the only other one, before I turn the floor back to my compatriots, is a book that reminds me about the edges of madness of extremism that we're seeing exacerbated in our country right now regarding people freaking out about what books other people are reading or what books their kids are reading. And in the ultra extreme, goofy world of political correctness, for me, positing that idea of, can a man authentically write with a woman's voice, or is that purely women's domain? Or can a commoner write about royalty, etc.? And so there are factions that bring it to extremely silly range. A book for me that was made into two great movie versions is True Grit. When I was a kid, it was John Wayne, and then, of course, it went on to become Jeff Bridges playing the unforgettable part. But it's a book that is about a little girl who is got something she needs to deal with. And it's written by a man, and I'm simply going to read you the first paragraph. People do not give it credence that a 14-year-old girl could leave home and go off in the wintertime to avenge her father's blood, but it did not seem so strange then, although I will say it did not happen every day. I was just 14 years of age when a coward going by the name of Tom Cheney shot my father down in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and robbed him of his life, his horse, and $150 in cash money, plus 2 California gold pieces that he carried in his trouser band. And you are off. And you are not sitting in a theater watching great American well-known actors. You're a 14-year-old girl. And for us, that's an accomplishment as a reader. It's just a grand story of revenge and comeuppance, to use a 19th century word. I pass the torch back to Scott.
Oh, okay. First book I read. Well, before I get to this first book, I want to interject a series of hard-nosed, hard-bitten private detectives. And there's a series of books written by Philip Carr called the Bernie Gunther novels. Now, Bernie Gunther is a World War I vet. He becomes a highly respected detective in the German Kripo. And Philip Carr takes you through all of that up into the 50s, the 60s. Now, Bernie Gunther is an anti-Nazi. He didn't want anything to do with that, but he ends up getting hired by Wilhelm Reich. Not Wilhelm Reich. The guy's name escapes me. One of the real bad Nazis, the guy who got offed in Czechoslovakia. Anyway, he gets hired by hardcore Nazis because he's so good at what he does. And this whole time, he's anti-Nazi. And it's just, there's 14 books. And poor Philip passed away a couple of years ago. And I'm so sad that he wasn't able to carry it on because I couldn't put these books down. Anyway.
Great compliment to an author.
Your best private detective in the worst possible scenario is Bernie Gunther. That's absolutely fantastic. First book I read this year called Her Majesty's Spy Master. Elizabeth I and Sir Francis Walsingham and the Birth of Modern Espionage. You can hardly believe that the stuff that took place back in that time and space, especially with the way that communication was back then, right? You had to I'll talk to you in a couple of months. I have to travel here. I have to travel here. And boy, he had a spy. He had a spy network that was it was unreal for the time. So that was my favorite. A book that really impressed me and still does to this day. And I've read it a couple of times, but it's not easy reading. It's called Last and First Men by Olaf Stapleton.
I read that book long ago that I don't remember it, except that I remember it knocked me out.
It's it's like a history of humanity across 2 billion years. Rise and fall of like 18 different civilizations, and it's another one of those books like Moby Dick. You have to read just a couple of pages and try to absorb what you're reading and where he's going with it. But once you get through it, it's just it just knocks me out today. And so what started me out on all this stuff, of course, probably with the rest of you too, was as a young man, Classics Illustrated.
Yay!
Yeah, absolutely.
And that kind of just set me off. My dad was a big reader. He left books laying around. You know, like the first book I remember picking up was Dune. My dad was big science fiction reader, and that's what turned me on to science fiction. And I remember picking it up and looking at those fantastic 50s sci-fi books covers and thinking, what's this? And he says, yeah, you can read it if you want. I think I was 8, 9. So I tried to read it. I couldn't, I didn't know what was going on. But eventually I came back and have read the entire series. And so sci-fi was big for me, big on H.P. Lovecraft, Poe, Asimov, all the golden authors of the golden age of science fiction. That was for me. But and you were talking about your endurance. I just got a book here too called The Empire of Ice and Stone.
Yes.
Okay. The disaster.
Tim, have you read this book?
No.
I'm afraid.
Oh, good.
It's on the pile. I haven't read it yet. That's The Heroic Voyage of the Karluk, which I've never heard of. But these kind of books about their survival and stuff like the Terror, HMS Terror, got hooked up on North and just.
They're timeless too.
They're unbelievable. They're unbelievable what those guys did.
you know, you served for years and had this extraordinary battery of experiences. All of us have good imaginations, but to have that experience to inform your imagination makes, for example, the Shackleton voyage come
Yeah.
in sharper focus. For
Well,
me,
I've been stuck in ice. I know what it's like to be stuck for not a whole year. No,
nobody went cannibal on anybody else.
oh my God. But just being stuck for maybe a week until you've gotten everything, you've got the ship righted and start, because we could break ice in the boat I was on, but not very much. But yeah, I've been stuck before. So yeah, reading about those guys, I have a little taste of it. And,
If I
can't
seem a
imagine,
little
hard to imagine.
if I seem a little distracted while we're working, it's because we're trying to bring Steve in, but short of being able to do that for the moment, Chanel, dear producer, can you have Marla on standby? And why don't I just bring her in now? And if Steve, we can get him, that will be great. But our next guest, transformational psychic medium Marla Fries, is known to audiences throughout the country with appearances on A&E, Bravo, History Channel, Sci-Fi, TV Land, and Gaia TV. Marla's remarkable memoir, which I recommend highly, American Psychic, A Spiritual Journey from the Heartland to Hollywood, Heaven, and Beyond, is the inspiring story of her journey from a small-time girl to successful TV and stage actress and gifted psychic. Her book has been on Amazon, Amazon bestseller, #1 release in ESP and mental and spiritual healing categories. Until the pandemic hit, Marla had been traveling across the country and internationally with book signings and her interactive group audience presentations, Messengers of Love from Marla, where she works with audience members offering divine insight about any aspect of their lives and messages from deceased loved ones. She is also works in private sessions and small groups. Marla's appearances in large stage venues include the Sun Valley, Idaho Wellness Festival, Women's Jonathan Club of Los Angeles and Malibu, Meta Center in New York City, Los Angeles Westwood Rotary, Beverly Hills Rotary, UCLA, and the Dreamland Festival in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm just jumping ahead a bit on these. Vitello's nightclub in Los Angeles, Conversations with Weigel at the Willamette Theater in Illinois, the Cumberland Theater, and Flourish Counseling and Wellness Centers in Washington, D.C. area. Most recently, Marla has participated, maybe this isn't most recent, in YouTube teleconferences, panel discussions, and international cultural connection tour with psychiatrist, author and consciousness expert Tom Campbell, sharing the science behind Marla's work, making the paranormal normal. And we will talk more about that in the second hour. Marla is a popular international radio guest on George Norrie's Coast to Coast, Lisa Gar's Awareness Now, Green Planet FM, and dozens of podcasts, including The Path 11. Marla has gained global audience as a psychic medium, expert co-host for UnknownCountry.com's Dreamland, where she interviewed scientific, paranormal, and spiritual authors between 2007 and 2017. Marla Fries, I love you. Welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Oh, I love you too. Oh, you know what? I've just enjoyed listening to you guys. It's just been really great. And really, I just love it. I just love men that sit down and read books. How about that? So
yeah, and I wanted this to be really inclusive. So I got a bunch of white guys and one woman. Blonde.
Yeah, you did great. You did great. But you know what? I want to speak about something here. You were talking about True Grit, and I didn't read the book, but I know both versions of the film. And I really like the Jeff Bridges one in the sense that there's a part of me, I really like revenge porn. And I think that's a really good example of a Western kind of revenge porn for this girl. And there's a part of me, there's a part of my spirit, truly, from my father, who was a horseman and came from the farm, and also a veteran. There's
yes,
a part, Yeah, there's a part of me that basically really identifies with that. So thank you so much for sharing all of that, you guys.
You would love that book. It will, because
The
you're a
book
horsewoman also, and
the book is closer to the Jeff Bridges version. It's
Yeah.
much more quirky. The first version with
Yes.
John Wayne really leans
Hollywood.
on John
Yeah,
Wayne.
exactly.
But the other one is truer to the book, and it really lets the little girl sort of like step out in front, and she's great. Like, she's a really great actor.
She is,
And she holds her own with Jeff Bridges just fine. She does a great job, and the book is much more in the spirit of that. It's really a great book. Charles Portis.
Thank you.
Exactly. So Marla, what's
Yeah.
a book that you have read this year? Let me ask you this way, simply for enjoyment.
Well, that's been interesting because I've dabbled in the political realm, and I don't know whether I've enjoyed that or not. And I've also read things. I've read Isabella Wilkerson's Cast, which wasn't necessarily fun either. But I want to inspire you guys, because in thinking about this, because Peter, you asked me to come aboard, and I was so thrilled. I thought, I was at the Monroe Institute again this last year. And I was there for the first UAP conference that they've ever had.
Now, remind listeners and viewers what that acronym stands for.
Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. It's the new acronym going that's basically talking about UFOs.
Indeed it is.
And it was a really interesting experience. So I just want to sort of introduce this conversation with Bob Monroe, because I am going to be talking about Tom Campbell, who is a physicist, author, and consciousness expert. But when I was at Monroe, it was really curious. It was a number of people that were there from different countries. It was sort of thrown together quickly. But Rob Freeman, who has been a UFO filmer, I don't know what, photographer, videographer for a while, came with his equipment, and we got something that is up on YouTube that I want you guys, and of course the listeners here, to take a look at. They call it the Monroe Flasher, and it's by Rob Freeman. And it's quite an experience, because we were out there. There were a number of us that were invited to participate. And I think that I'm one of those people that I hope you guys are really interested in sort of experiencing yourself, which is basically more of the paranormal. And I've been exploring how to make it normal. So, so I was there, I was doing that. And of course, when Peter asked me to do this, I was thinking about Bob Monroe and some of his books, Journeys Out of the Body, etc., because this was part of the milieu that I've been interested in with Peter. And I really wanted to share with you guys what I think might be something that might inspire your own imagination. You said, Peter, that everybody's imagination is great here. But one of the things that Tom Campbell has been doing, who is this physicist, author, and consciousness expert, he was also the guy that developed the binaural beat system along with Dennis Menerich at the Monroe Institute. But Tom has been taking his work, all of his explorations, because Bob actually had him doing all of the science experiments about what Bob was having done in going out of the body and all of this. Tom Campbell was doing those experiments. He was doing the science behind it. So what Tom has done in the last couple of years is tried to get intellectuals like you guys to have altered states of consciousness without the use of drugs, and have these experiences that do give you the opportunity to do what I do, which is basically talk to dead people, do some remote viewing, experience past lives, and tap into the past, present, and future databases. So I wanted to share with you a book that Tom just came out with. It's a very—
Yes, what we just heard was the backstory.
Yes.
Continue on.
Okay, thank you. How'd I do? Did I stay on point, you guys?
Now, this is cutting edge stuff, and it fascinates me.
Oh, good. Well, we did this in these immersives where we would take Tom's binaural beats, which are Cadillac versions, and I think you guys can buy them online. But what Tom did in an advanced explorers group was because someone in the group who was an intellectual, who would started having these sort of experiences himself and really doubted them, Tom said, well, close your eyes and we're going to do something. And he took us to a park. And he had us go into this park, see this, see that. And then he said, why don't you just experience this yourself? We're going to give you 5 minutes. And everybody had their own experience in this park. And some of us were interacting with each other and we didn't know it, of course, until we talked about it. So Tom decided to do more about this. And so he wrote a little book, and and the print version as well as the Kindle is up on Amazon. Peter has the link, of course, and then Soundwise has the audio version. But what
the book is titled?
Tom's Park. And what it's doing, you guys, it's giving people the opportunity to have these experiences without any shame. So a lot of the science-minded people who are having the things that I do and want to do some of those things, they don't really know how to engage their imagination. And so Tom's Park is really giving people an experience. It's basically, it's direct. It's happening at an immediate time. It's basically an experiential connection that makes us, the characters in the experience.
And I want you to hold that thought for a moment, because I want to get in some talk on one more book before we go to break, and then we'll return to that. And that, Stephen, is Magpie Murders. Tell us about it.
I'd actually like to talk about the author before I talk about the book. Anthony Horowitz, he's incredibly prolific. You may not have heard of him directly, but I'm sure you've heard of things he's done, among many other things. And it feels like he writes a book every 2 minutes, or it seems like. The Alex Rider young adult espionage series, which I never read but heard of it. Foyle's War is a wonderful TV series. I think he's written like all the episodes for 1 million seasons. He also writes a series of sanctioned Sherlock Holmes books, sanctioned from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's estate.
Me.
And James Bond also. Anyway, that's not what this is. This is Magpie Murders. And his other series starts with The Word is Murder. There is a theme here, mystery novels, of course, but it's more than that. I'm going to start with Magpie real quick. It is a mystery that takes place in the publishing industry, which I'm biased. I love, because I'm in the publishing industry. I love books. I love reading. And it's a great murder mystery that takes place within this industry. There's an editor that has to deal with a manuscript from this famous author that she's worked with, who happens to be killed, but that's not the murder that the title is referencing. I love books and I love reading, but more than that, I also love to read how things are written. And that's where this book comes in, because it's more than just a murder mystery. We love murder mysteries. Somebody gets killed, there's a crime, a detective gets hired, figures it out, at the end solves the crime. Great. But how do you make it different? And I think Anthony Horowitz makes it different 2 different ways. One way is with this series, and there are two books in the series. A third one's coming. So it starts off with the main character. She's an editor. It's first person. It's great. She's like, I'm going to sit down and read this new book from my author. It's called Magpie Murders, and I'm going to edit the hell out of it. I've got a glass of wine. Let's do it. And then you turn a few pages here, and you actually start to read Magpie Murders. So it's 2 novels. There you go. So here's the book starts, and then you turn like towards page, 6 or 7, and then you start to read Magpie Murders. And it's even got a really cool series list of the detective, and it's got a really great like fake copyright page, which is really cool. So it's very clever. And you read the novel, and of course that's where the clues are, because the clues that will help you solve the real murder are in this other separate novel. It's just very clever, very well written. There are 2 of these, and it was just a series on PBS. The second one, I'll be very quick. It's called The Word is Murder. It's another detective series by Anthony Horowitz. This one stars Anthony Horowitz, the writer, who's writing Magpie Murders, and he winds up being the Watson to this detective that he's worked with on one of his TV series that he's been writing for. And his job is to follow the detective around and then write a series of novels based on their adventures, this is book one. It's wild. It sort of turns the whole murder genre on its head. It's very clever, very well written. I highly recommend it, and I think you'll like it.
We are coming into our first break. This is Peter Robbins. The show is the final episode of Meanwhile Here on Earth for 2022. My guests tonight are Marla Fries, Tim Warenko, Steve Pikula, Greg Bishop, and Scott Santa, and we will be back in 4.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
And we are back with Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, Peter Robbins, and my guests for this evening, Scott Santa, Greg Bishop, Steve Pikula, Tim Warenko, and Marla Fries. And I'm going to do a real quick round robin on a question or two here about how old were you when the reading bug really first bit you? when you really started to read for pleasure as opposed to a school assignment or something? Scott.
Oh, this is an easy one for me. 7th grade, our school library had a book club, and you could order books through the book club. And the first book I ordered, just because it was recommended by my father, was The Count of Monte Cristo.
Whoa!
And
there's grand adventure on a massive scale. That's an 800-page book.
That book did it for me. I just bit into that thing, and I wouldn't let go until I was done. So after that, everything up to now followed that book. Of course, after that, I read Man in the Iron Mask and then The Three Musketeers.
That's brilliant.
But yeah, The Count of Monte Cristo was the door that opened for me and led me to everything else that I've read. So
you, bravo, Ed, and bravo, Victor Hugo. Greg, when you first really started to read, either to get escape, involvement, or for the love of reading and learning?
My father was and still is a huge reader. He still goes to the library every week and gets stacks of books. 93-year-old man.
Bravo.
And he taught me how to read by floating corks in the tub and having me read the letters off them. So by the time I got to nursery school, I could read. So after that, they put me in nursery school and I was already reading comics, for relatives. They go, oh, we could read. I didn't know what I was reading, but I could sound out the words. So what he did was he said, we're going to the library every week and you're going to pick out 3 or 4 books. I don't care what they are. And then we'll come back next week and we'll get more of them. And lo and behold, what is the first, like in the first 001 of the Dewey Decimal System, it's flight, part of it. And part of it is paranormal, UFOs, ghosts, things like that. So that was right in front of me in the first section of the library.
You didn't have a chance.
I didn't really go any further. I read every book in that section. And then I went to the other library that was across another place. And I read every book there that I hadn't read in the first library. On the way, reading, little bits of teen fiction and history and things like that. But I was from probably 6 or 7 years old, I was hooked on paranormal books.
I love it. Marla, when you first got the reading bug?
Who was that?
About how old were you and what were the circumstances when you fell in love with reading? Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. I didn't hear the name. Well, I was just thinking about how my 2nd grade teacher would read Mrs. Piggywiggle and Charlotte's Web. And I was so interested in that. And then I started doing these plays, and the plays, the cheesy little plays that I was doing. But I really grabbed, I think it was in 7th grade, How Green Was My Valley.
Ooh.
Oh my God.
Well,
I was so invested in that. And then it was Huxley's Brave New World that really did me in. I wanted to know all about Soma.
Well said.
Who doesn't?
Tim?
So that's how that happened for me.
Outstanding. And Tim?
I guess there's a couple different answers because it's a process. 2nd grade, picture books and stuff like that. We had to do book reports, and you'd get a prize if you did the most books. In it was a one, what was the book about? 1 sentence, your favorite part, and then you draw a picture. So that was 2nd grade, and I really enjoyed doing that stuff. So that was, and I did well at that. 7th grade. Lloyd Alexander, the Prydain Chronicles, really, that was great. Really, really great stuff. But I didn't really get into reading until after I was done with school. After I graduated college, and it was no longer to for an assignment, to meet a goal, to do a thing. And you could just read it because you just wanted to. And I went back and I reread a lot of the stuff that I had to read for high school or for college or whatever. And I found them
you never read it.
Yeah, it's it turns out these are actually pretty good. So yeah, Yeah, there's a reason that the classics sort of stick around and why they assign them. They actually do have staying power. But yeah, it was definitely after college. Once the burden of an assignment left, then it became something that I actually enjoyed, and I became a much more voracious reader after that.
Yeah. Steve?
It definitely started in elementary school because we used to have what was called scholastic book fairs, where we would get a little catalog of books, and we'd place our orders, and then yeah, exactly. And then I remember whenever the delivery would come, the box was one of my favorite days, and because we would see the box get delivered into the room, and I'd have to wait for them to open the box and you know, like give everybody their books. And I realized as an adult, it's the same exact feeling I get when I get Amazon deliveries. You know, it's like, oh, this is something really cool. And my grandmother was a huge reader, also would live right across the street from the library and would go there daily and just get stacks of books. And she made it a point to tell me constantly, like, always have a book with you, always, wherever you go.
Yeah.
Just have a book, and she enforced it, and you know, in a good way, because she would constantly be giving me books. So, and I have two older sisters, so there were always books around, including Dune. I still have their original copy from when they were, you know, little girls with like, and they signed their name in the front, and a stack of old Stephen King books, and that's when I really started reading. I just started reading all of old Stephen King books, probably at an age that was not appropriate to read Stephen King books, but whatever, they were books and they were fun. So yes, books everywhere in my household forever.
That's great.
I was a bit slow to reading in that I was born in New York City, and my folks, following the American dream, bought a house about 30 miles east of the city in a village called Rockville Center on Long Island. So I had the city, but I came of age in a village. It was quite a wonderful combination of circumstances. And we moved there when I was 7. And I think the first or second week, my mother took me to the library. And it was at the time a building from 1912 that had originally been a Knights of Columbus building, with an upstairs and a downstairs with the children's library. And when we moved to Nassau County from Queens, I had come from a school district where we were putting letters together to form these things called words. And the new school, the kids are putting words together to form these things called sentences. I mean, and after 2 weeks, they very properly plunked me in the first grade, where I should have been in the first place. And that was why I was the oldest and shortest kid for years after that. But that's a side story. Getting the library card, my first official connection with the adult world. And once I had permission to ride my bike into town, that world was open to me. I'm old enough to have seen 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea when it first came out. My grandfather took me to see it at Radio City Music Hall. It might have been the first film I ever saw, quite young, obviously. And it was the most extraordinary day of my life. I was obsessed with the Nautilus, that Walt Disney version that's so wonderfully Victorian, with this opening world of acting of Kirk Douglas, who is my first favorite movie star, and Peter Lorre, and how underwater reality and the concept of a ship that killed ships. It was a ship that was against war, and all these concepts coming together. And my father, after I saw the film, gave me his copy. Big, heavy, beat up 1930 version of a 1920 book. And that was my first grown-up book. And I'll just say there was a bookend experience a year later. And I guess it was the closest thing I ever had in my life to an Atticus Finch kind of experience. You know, this thing of Gregory Peck as your father in the South and fighting. He gave me his copy of a book called Huckleberry Finn. I'm 8 years old. It's a much simpler time. And he sat me down and he said, this is one of the greatest adventures you'll ever read. He's a wonderful writer, but there's a word in it that's used repeatedly. You know, we talked about bad words. Well, this is the worst bad word, and you never use it, but this is what they used then. So just read it for what it is. And after that, you know, it was upward and onward. One more quick question about your reading and then move on. Where and when do you have a best time, or do you have it scheduled, or in your life is one time more and more opportune, or when do you read for pleasure and for work? Well, for pleasure, Scott. Well, now at this point in your life, compared to say when you were in the Merchant Marine.
Let's see, where is it? Well, right now I'm reading a nonfiction called Mary's Mosaic.
And any special time of day or night, or just
this is nonfiction, and it has to do with the Kennedy assassination.
A favorite.
I read nonfiction during the day. Okay, and it's still light up because I'm more awake than I am in the evening, and then I'll read my fiction books later in the day, later in the evening. Just so, just because the attention span seems to be better during the day, and if I pick up a nonfiction book and start digging into it and try to go to bed after, forget it. It's not going to happen. So with a nonfiction or a fiction book, you can just set it down and nod off, pick it right back up. But so absorb nonfiction books better during the day, fiction in the evening for me.
That sounds like it has a scientific basis to me. Greg, same question.
I have a long time ago, my late wife said, no more books, because our entire hallway and half the living room was filled with books. We got another whole library out in the garage. So I'm waiting.
Structural problems with the house at a certain point.
Yeah. So at that point, and I still will buy books, but basically either they're friends that have written books and given them to me and sign them, or there's a first edition of something I really like. Like, this, I bought this after the book ban, but it's a first edition of John Barleycorn, so I wanted to have. But yeah, so the fact that I have most of my stuff on the Kindle right now, I just take it with me. And when I read, when it's like, okay, there's nothing to do for an hour, or I've got to wait for something, or I'm at the doctor's or whatever. And then sometimes when I'm going to sleep, but mostly it's like when I can catch some time during the day, which makes these things take way longer than they used to. Unless I'm going to interview somebody, then I read their entire book in 2 days.
I admire that, and that is a challenge as a host, because you can always fake it, or you can read a treatment of it, or what the promo says, or do the due diligence. Marla, your reading habit?
Well, I was just thinking about everything you guys are saying, and when I was a co-host on Dreamland, I actually read the books of the people that I had to interview.
You would,
but I'm embarrassed because I'm looking at my. I don't know. Can you see that bookcase there? And there's a whole stack right there that I haven't gotten to, and I'm really, really embarrassed about it.
Me too.
It's not fiction.
Don't be, because I've got piles.
Yeah, I've got piles
that I mean to get to, and eventually I do. But your pile goes up, it goes down a little bit, then it goes back up, and then it goes down. So don't worry.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, it's not fiction. I mean, none of it's fiction, but I'm writing right now, so I have to.
The esteemed Strand Bookstore in New York, my personal favorite of any English language bookstore in the Western world, has a whole product line with printed on it, so many books, so little time. Tim, you're working. I mean, you're running a production company, even though it's not, Sony or something. But you're running a production company. Do you work regular hours, even though you're working from home, and read at breaks, or how do you? What's the reading habit you've developed?
Well, I live in New Jersey, and I used to, and my business is in New York. But since the pandemic, there's no real commuting. I used to read on the bus every day, going in and coming home, but that's not around anymore. But over 20 plus years of commuting, I built up the habit. I get up around 6 a.m, and I still do that. So what I've been doing working from home, which has been delightful, is I get up, I make a coffee, I read for a bit in the morning time before I get anything going. It's been delightful. I don't read as much as I used to. I used to really try to do 52 books a year, but it got to be a point where I'm like, okay, I have to fit in Old Man and the Sea to make up time, because I read, some gigantic other thing. And I sort of stopped doing that. And, I do what I do, and that's how it works out, and that's it. But yeah, the morning time is what I do, and I also am writing also. So as my production company, I've been developing a show that's been going on for a while now, and so I do a lot of writing as well, and that just is time consuming, as I'm sure you know. And it just takes time, and you do what you can. That's all.
Yeah. Steve.
I mean, whenever the opportunity arises at this point, like whenever there's a free moment, you can't see it now, but there's one of my to be read piles is behind me on this table here. Another one is right over here. And another one is over there. So, and they just keep growing. And working, at a publisher, certainly when we were working in the office, which we're not, at the moment, I mean, books literally everywhere you turn, and on shelves, just take them, go home with them and everything. And I love physical books. I love print books. They're great, but I do appreciate Kindle books, and I have a Kindle, and I, and I'll read one of my many books whenever before I go to bed. But when I go to bed, then you take the Kindle out, because now it's like, you don't have to turn the light on, you can fall asleep with it. It's great. So anytime, anywhere.
I must say, in recent years, the pandemic has changed so much of our behavior, and I live on my own in the countryside, and the person I talk to the most is a cat, which that sentence underscores the problem that I'm having in life with transference of power. And depending on whether the cat will allow me to read, because you all know, if you have a cat, the rules are, if the cat wants to do this and you want to do that, then you do this. And I can be reading and the cat will lie on just the part of the book that I'm reading and demand a little bit of attention, and you do your best. But I find I read at meals regularly now, because I don't have a regular human companion to speak with. And used to, of course, anywhere in transit, always have a book or two. And at night sometimes, depending. I love films. I know you guys do too. And I wanted to just do a couple of book-related films very briefly, and then get back into the game with you guys, which is Prizzi's Honor. You all may remember if you read it, if you saw the movie, you may remember as a romp with Jack Nicholson and Kathleen Turner, and a mob comedy. It's actually a brilliantly plotted, very dark comedy written by Richard Condon, who, considering how funny this book is in such a dark way, and how there are two other books in the series that follow, Richard Condon also gave us something some years ago called The Manchurian Candidate. He is a very extraordinarily widely versed author. And I just want to read the beginning of the liner notes here. There have been many stories about the mafia and many more about love, but no one has ever combined both, certainly not in a novel of the power, distinction, and sheer human comedy of Prizzi's Honor. Sounds like the author wrote the liner notes. Charlie Partana, a wonderful characterization, and it is fun sometimes to see an actor, when you read the words of a good a book that's been well translated, is the Sodo Capo of the powerful Prizzi's, a prince of murderers who made his bones at the age of 13, as we do, with his first hit. Irene Walker, ex-prostitute, ex-mob courier, is now beautiful Los Angeles tax consultant, whose desk and ledgers hide her true identity as a freelancer of the deadliest kind. Charlie and Irene meet. He falls helplessly in love with her, and she falls with him. Together, caught in the intensely brutal, intensely moral world of the mafia, they make love and more until Charlie's betrayal of Prizzi's honor leads him inexorably to the ultimate betrayal. Just laugh out loud fun. Nothing deep there. Annie Dillard is a writer's writer, and she writes about writing, and she writes about it wonderfully well. And if you're a writer, you can learn a great deal from her daily writing on life being a writer. And if you're not a writer, it's a wonderful book that gives you a window in on that kind of writer's life. Steve, I want to jump to the third novel that you have set out for us.
That one, again, from Anthony Horowitz. This is the one where he plays the Watson to some other detective. And again, very cleverly written. And honestly, I mean, I know it's fiction. I think it's fiction, but it's written so well that I'm like, I don't know. Does he really know this detective named Hawthorne? Is he really solving crimes? No, but maybe. I don't know. It's so good. Highly recommend it.
Tim, you have, again, a good-sized list of wonderfully varied titles. One of the things from the beginnings of our friendship that I enjoy about you is you have so many things that you're interested in, which is the hallmark of a lot of us. And I think the mark of an internally successful person on a certain level, no matter, and some of us are known for being something in something. And yet we still have many multiple. That's like a Welsh phrase of big, large, other things that fascinate us. Another one of the books that you've chosen to bring to our attention tonight?
Oh, from you know
Your
what?
call.
I would sure. I'll bring up one for that may fit in with this crowd is a book called Chaos. It's called Chaos: Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the '60s.
Yes,
I know that book. Yeah,
it was absolutely like a total page turner and completely bananas. The thing that I loved so much about this book was that this author is, he's a journalist, and he really, really, really dedicated himself to just journalistic ethics and really trying to verify his sources. And it's this thing. It starts off as like an assignment that he's doing for, I think, like Rolling Stone. I could be wrong. Maybe it's Vanity Fair or something, but he's going to do this essay on Charles Manson as the anniversary of the killings comes up, and he starts digging, and one thing leads to another, and it becomes like this 10-year odyssey of him trying to button down these details. And it gets very, very close to tinfoil hats level craziness, but it's infuriatingly close. Every single detail of, like, as soon as he's going to verify something, he's in a meeting with someone, and the person literally takes the briefcase and throws it in the ocean. And he's like, well, I'll never give you this evidence that would prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. And they destroy the thing right in front of him. And like, you're like, well, were they just fucking with him, or were they like, was there anything there? And because he can never quite get it, it's a little bit like the poem. He's like chasing the horizon, and he never quite gets there. But the threads get so like tantalizingly close to like tying the CIA to Charles Manson and mind control experiments. And it's really great. It's a great, great book. And it's a really
the author again, Tim?
History of the '60s. I wrote it down. Hang on. I've got it here. It is called Chaos. It is by a guy named Tom O'Neill.
Okay. Wow.
Totally great book. And I know it would be up your alley, and that's a great one. I read a lot of great books this year. I read some that were not great, but some that were really great. And I read a lot of poetry this year also, which just sort of like stumbled into my life, and it was all good stuff. Also, a big shout out to what Steve said before, Steve Pakula, about the hard case crime stuff. That whole genre is just great. I'm a big fan of that. In general, like if I don't have anything on my to read shelf, you could sort of like pick any one of the titles from that list, and you'll come up with something that's a real page turner.
I maybe because I love the history of the city of New York, in part because starting from before I can remember, my grandfather would walk me around Lower Manhattan, or we get on the subway and go someplace. And by the time I was 5, I had a concept of what an imagination means and history. And the city's history has fascinated me ever since. There's a wonderful fiction writer. He, for many years, has taught literature at Bard College, a wonderful smaller college in upstate New York, called Caleb Carr. And for those of you who like series, and we've since pandemic, just such a golden age of television series. One, I don't remember the channel, but it's called The Alienist. Did any of you see? Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's good.
You know, E.L. Doctorow stuff taking us back to the 1880s. It's dark as hell, and it's so brilliantly acted. And the language that's being spoken, you feel you're slipping back in time. Well, Carr had been commissioned some years ago by the estate of Arthur Conan Doyle to submit a manuscript for a new Sherlock Holmes story. And what an honor that is for a writer. And being a Holmesian from the age of about 11 or so, when I was introduced to him, maybe even 9, through the great Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce, black and white English movies. This is the best Sherlock Holmes novel I've ever read by somebody who's not Arthur Conan Doyle. And it's called The Italian Secretary. And it's just absolutely, you are back in the 1880s and every word is as good as it can be. It's a murder mystery that takes place up in Holland, in Scotland. It involves a certain important royal and some dark doings in a very big castle. Pure joyous escapism.
Peter, if you like that book, Caleb Carr also, his first book is this book called The Devil Soldier, which is a really, really great book. If you've never read that, I would highly recommend that one. It's him as a historian, not doing any fiction work or even fictionalized stuff. It's just this really, really well-researched, there's
and if you like dark fiction, it is dark. It's dark as it gets.
Who liked the movie? Who liked the movie?
It was a mini series I shot in like Vienna and called The Alienist, and it was sensational. Marla, again, your schedule has been, you do so many things. Is there a book that comes to mind that you have read for either inspiration or fun? Because I do want to allow some time for you to talk about the park and how it's evolved as kind of the cutting edge of what's next in what we'll call books. But have you this past year had anything that you've read just as a book that you've simply enjoyed or gotten value out of with regular reading time?
Peter, none of them were fun. Let me put it that way. So
then for the equivalent, don't, whatever you do not enjoy the process.
I think the whole point about this is I feel that there's some sort of relief in the zeitgeist in our world right now. So where there is a little more joyous milieu going on. And I'm just so excited about just being here with you guys. It's been inspiring because it really does remind me that I don't need to read nonfiction consistently to learn things, really to stimulate that brain. And I just love that. I love listening. I love listening to the voices of those who really love. And I wrote this down, the whole thing about to have a dynamic or to be in a, to read something where the audience doesn't have any distraction. I love that, Tim. I thought that was really, really great. I do have a question about Moby Dick because I've never read it.
Please.
Does he really talk about the whale?
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Good.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I'm really interested in that. So maybe that's on my next list.
There's a lot of discussion about the whale. There's an interesting aspect to it where the time in which it was written, there's a very serious debate that they have over whether or not it's a fish. Like, does it count as a fish? And there's a lot of discussion of like the bone structure of the whale, and like they slaughter it, and you get to like really, really dive into, literally in one point, like the insides of what a whale is like, and it's exhaustive in its detail. I worked at a film lab. This is backstory, but I worked at a film lab and for several years, and we did a restoration of a film of an actual whaling journey There's not much of this that exists, but the Mystic Museum in Connecticut actually commissioned in the 20s a whaling voyage on a historical whaling ship, and they went out and they went out and killed a whale just for the heck of it. And there's movie footage of this, and I worked on the restoration of that film. Anyway, in that process, what I learned from the guy was that a lot of what we know about whaling is from Moby Dick. They're the people who were, who worked on these ships, they were overwhelmingly illiterate. So having someone who was able to write about it as articulately as Melville was a rarity. There are certainly other accounts of whaling. It's not like this is the only one, but an enormous amount of the detail of what we know about how whaling was conducted, it comes from Moby Dick. We don't have a lot of other sources.
Thanks. And I like the history of it because there's a distance. It's what the film brings to us that makes it so real. That is often not enjoyed in any way, shape, or form. So thank you for sharing that.
Hope you like it.
I know, obviously, we right now, Scott, you are in that golden land of not having to go in the morning and go to work, either from home or from anywhere else. But the reality of reading, for me, as far as nonfiction goes, I just want to cite the fact that we all read technical stuff or stuff for business one way or the other as part of what we do. For me, a fair amount of that reading for a fair amount of time has been around the UAP phenomena. And I want to just give some titles here that I've read this year and then escaped from with these other books. And spending some of this year in England and connecting with colleagues there and coming back with a slew of books by British authors, two which are extraordinarily well-grounded. You have The Public Deceived, The Grand UFO Deception by Philip Kinsella, and The Digital Demon, Countdown to Disaster, lurid as it sounds, by Ronald Kinsella. If these books seem to have a similar name, Kinsella, it's because they're written by one of the most remarkable pair of brothers I've ever met, who, considering that they are the very definition of rationality, of logic, of grounded thinking, of decency, they're just two of my favorite people. They're also identical twin empath, psychic UFO abductees, for real. And not of the fun kind of abductions. I'm of a mind that we have any number of other intelligences doing their mischief with different intentions, and people experience it different ways. But these two books, The Public Deceived by Philip Kinsella and The Digital Demon by Ronald Kinsella, eye-opening, fascinating, and surprisingly well-grounded, not ethereal goofball stuff.
Could we see the covers again, please, Peter?
Yes. Both of them are very fine researchers and writers. Ronald also happens to be a brilliant, world-class artist and sculptor. His work is just remarkable. And he's now working, one of the handful of artists that I know that are working with 3D printers. And he is creating some extraordinary imagery. Another a UFO personality in the UK and a very good author, Jason Gleaves, is also an artist who is working with 3D printers to create tableaus and models of famous UFO cases and doing it really, really well. His book, UFO Encounters Up Close and Personal, is one of a number of really good compendiums that if you're knowledgeable in the subject, this is a book you can pick up and refresh so many case histories. If you're new to the story, it's a great book to get a sense of the sweep of UFO cases that's been documented in this book. And before I move on, one of my two favorite nonfiction books of the year and a very unique reading experience for me is The Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack by Ralph Blumenthal. Ralph is a distinguished journalist with the New York Times for over 50 years. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer. He has lived an extraordinary life, and it's the first time in my life that somebody wrote a real grown-up major publisher biography of a man who I not only knew, but who was a real friend and somebody I loved. And we think we know our friends, but of course we only know whatever parameter. And it is a really interesting read. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Okay.
The other last one before we move on is my sentimental favorite, certainly the best non-paranormal nonfiction read of the year for me has been Pete Hamill's Downtown. If you love New York City, or you want to learn more about why some of us love New York City, this great guy, that face, who died a year or so ago at age 89 at home, in his home in Brooklyn, New York, was a muckraking career journalist who used to write really great progressive articles for the New York Post when it was still a progressive newspaper before the Murdoch group gobbled it up, and who is one of the great chroniclers of New York City politics and events. Tough, no nonsense, observant. One thing I miss pre-pandemic is working as a walking tour guide in New York City, and I know downtown New York better than most people do. Of anybody living or dead that I would have liked to have gone on a walk that I know so well with, this would have been the man. It's the story of America is in here, and the story of New York City, and the most colorful, outrageous, corrupt, decent, wonderful, horrible people, and the mass movements that began in the Western world that emanated out of New York City. He's a brilliant storyteller and a great chronicler and a wonderful New York treasure. Downtown, Pete Hamill. Greg, jump in with a book that impressed you or that moved you or that you're still thinking about this year.
That came out this year, you mean?
No, just one that you read this year.
Yeah, because I mean, look, here's my Kindle.
Jesus.
You know,
it's better than carrying around these. I mean, really. I mean, what do you do with these? These are doorstops, but they're quite extraordinary. So I know.
Sometimes I feel like an analog man stuck in a digital world. Continue on.
Well, you know, I've got both, you know, because I want to be able to read whenever I can. I'm still getting through my friend Josh Cutchin's book, Ecology of Souls,
completely separate from books.
Paranormal and UFOs.
Reading is
one of the best books ever.
Wait. Two people are talking at the same time. I didn't hear that, Greg. What are you talking about? What are the books?
There's a friend of mine that, I mean, I will mention his book. I'm not going to read out of it because I didn't mark it, but it's called Ecology of Souls.
Okay.
And it's about, actually, I have electronic, and it's called The New Mythology of Death and the Paranormal. It's in 2 volumes.
Okay.
By my friend Josh Cutchin, and I think it's a very good, new, important book. It takes Whitley Strieber's wife, Anne's. Remember, Anne said, "I think this has something to do with the dead," and it explores that in a 2-volume work.
Whoa.
It's very comprehensive. So that one really impressed me, notwithstanding that he's a good friend of mine.
Yes.
Was that Terrence McKenna on the cover?
Yes, he does talk about Terrence. It's kind of it's almost supposed to look medieval. Looks like a Saint Terrence, you know.
All right.
I did want to read another passage, not a big one. Do you want an analytical one or a chewing the scenery, beautifully written one?
This is going to be a democratic vote, ladies and gentlemen. Technical or romantic? Hands, please. Technical? Romantic? Yes.
Everybody
the ayes
wants
have
that.
it.
Okay.
Go for it, Greg.
This author lived in the 19th century again. He was a social outcast. He left his home. He moved to New Orleans. He married a black woman, which he got, and he was white, and he was short. He had some problem with his legs, kind of like Toulouse-Lautrec.
Gosh.
And then they were horribly, persecuted for that because it was a mixed race marriage. Then she died. I think she got sick. Then he moved to Japan and stayed there the rest of his life. And his name was Lafcadio Hearn, a very strange name.
Say that again.
But
it's the first time I think any of us have encountered that first name.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what the name means, but when I read his stuff, it's like being on mushrooms or something. It's psychedelic in the way. Remember I said earlier about an economy of words? You can have one sentence that describes an entire scene. That's what he does. I'll just read 2 paragraphs. And it's his, when he moved to Japan, it's called My First Day in the Orient. And he was writing as a newspaper reporter or as a reporter to a magazine, as a correspondent. And let me put it in the light here so I can read it better. It is with the delicious surprise of the first journey through Japanese streets, unable to make one's runner understand anything but gestures, frantic gestures to roll on anywhere, everywhere, since it's all unspeakably pleasurable and new, that one first receives the real sensation of being in the Orient. In this Far East so much read of, so long dreamed of, yet as the eyes bear witness here, heretofore all unknown. There is a romance even in the first full consciousness of this rather commonplace fact. But for me, this consciousness is transfigured inexpressibly by the divine beauty of the day. There is some charm unutterable in the morning air, cool with the coolness of Japanese spring and wind waves from the snowy cone of Fuji. A charm perhaps due rather to the softest lucidity than any positive tone, an atmospheric limpidity extraordinary, with only a suggestion of blue in it. Though with the most distant objects appear focused with amazing sharpness. The sun is only pleasantly warm. The rickshaw most cozy little vehicle imaginable, and the street vistas, as seen above the dancing white mushroom-shaped hat of any sandaled runner, have the allurement of which I fancy that I could never weary. Elfish everything seems, for everything as well as everybody is small and queer and mysterious. The little houses under their blue roofs, the little shop fronts hung with blue, and the smiling people in their blue costumes. The illusion is only broken by the occasional passing of a tall foreigner and by diverse shop signs bearing announcements in absurd attempts at English. They even had it then. Nevertheless, such discords only serve to emphasize reality that never materially lessens the fascination of the funny little streets. I mean, it goes on and on and on like that for pages. And to me, it's just like being bathed in just like, I just read it and I'm seeing all these things. It's over 100 years ago and I can see it right there. And when I write, that's what I try to do with this economy of words to describe something, eloquently, but simply, so you don't have to sit there and figure out what the words are or whatever. And Truman Capote could do that. Joan Didion does that.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of writers I admire. Jack London, for that matter. So, thank you for being patient and letting me read that.
Yeah, no, that is
Beautiful.
great. Scott, a book that you're still resonating from that you have read this year?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's going to be Return of the Sorcerer, and it's like the best of Clark Ashton Smith, who was a pal of H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh boy!
So this is
I know that name.
It's way out science fiction, fantasy. But that guy, boy, nobody writes like Clark Ashton Smith. I mean, and then that's what Lovecraft said. So it's this one.
I read a detective novel early this year, and it came to me in a way that most books don't, which is a very nice email from the author saying that was his first book in the world of police detective fiction, set in Dayton, Ohio, cold case murder. And would I be interested in reading it? Because he was a fan of mine. And so I read a book called Satan's Choir with a wonderful cover. there, and it's a story about a cold case murder, I think very well handled, involving an abuse within the Catholic Church. Anyway, he followed up saying, I've just completed a manuscript for another detective novel. It's the same detective. He's now retired, and he's taken on a cold case that we learn as we read it has to do with the original UFO cover-up going back to 1947. The author, who is named Tom Harley Campbell, grew up in Dayton. He was born in Dayton, Ohio. So the Wright-Patterson Air Force, for some of us, of course, resonates as a holy of holies of UFO mythology and lore and legend and reality. And Project Blue Book, which we all know as the Air Force's official publicity agency, so to say, for doing something, closed in 1968. He grew up, the last director of Project Blue Book was Major Hector Quintanilla. And Carl Quintanilla, his son, was the dearest friend of our author. And he grew up around the house also and knew his friend's father. And in high school, he had a journalism assignment. And just as Quintanilla retired, he interviewed him for a high school paper. And then off the record, he said, really, gave him the regular line. And he told him what he felt it was more like. In any case, he went on to write a great and unique, as far as I know, detective novel that is not a UFO novel, but the cover-up is around as the bodies start to pile up. It's all set there. It's all extremely accurate to the base. It's all extremely accurate to Dayton, Ohio. And I actually recommend it for people who are very interested in UFOs, just because it's such a refreshing, surprising change from the genre. If you like good detective novels, read it. If you're interested in UFOs, read it. Tom does a great job. And before I stop hogging the floor, again, finishing up the UFO books, rereading. The best book that I've reread this year, and in a way it's not cheating to say you reread it because it is the expanded version of Tom Carey and Don Schmidt's Witness to Roswell. This is one of the classics, and one of the books I direct people toward if they're interested, well, especially if we even with respect, tend to dismiss witness testimony, because especially in cases of such wild allegations, this is the book that brings it really home. And through Don and Tom, I have met some of these people, really all, I think, except one of them gone now, who were there. You look at their motives, you look at what they say, you look at the uniformity of it, and it's infuriating, and it's fascinating, and it just adds weight to the other evidence that we have about Roswell. That took me to a reread of a book that I hadn't read since it came out in 2008, which I have a sentimental attachment to because I saw an early draft of it, so to say, about 25 years before it came out as an actual book. And that is Bud Hopkins' unique memoir called Art, Life, and UFOs. And Bud, of course, was a well-known and respected figure in UFO studies, the father of the modern study of UFO abduction phenomena from a scientific point of view. But he was also a painter, deeply immersed in the New York art world, a distinguished artist, an art historian, and it's just a great American memoir. I've had people come back to me and say, I was really interested to read it, but it was too much about art and not enough about UFOs. Other people saying, I really love the art part, but the UFO part, but why did I have to know about the art and his life? Anyway, there's a 1 in 3 chance you may not be satisfied reading it. I found all 3 parts of his life very interesting. And lastly, my UFO book of the year, and I'm sorry he couldn't be here tonight, but he has been a guest on the show. And it's a book about the UFO abduction phenomena from a point of view that we have never actually had. Steve Aspin is a retired businessman who makes his home in Lincolnshire, England. In his book, out of time. He has, in my opinion, written a crossover work about the enduring worldwide reports of alien abduction. The book is intended for both those familiar with the historic published case material and the curious reader unfamiliar with the decades of serious research of this superficially improbable phenomenon. He details his lifelong personal experiences and the relationships he built with leading researchers during his years of investigating this phenomena. He has at all times attempted to approach the subject with critical thoroughness and intellectual rigor. Although successfully normalized in popular culture to become background noise or a minor comic footnote in otherwise busy lives, this subject has real and serious implications for both the individual experiencer and human society collectively. I'll just close by saying, and I will say here, Steve is a good friend of mine. He began confiding some of the particulars of his life to me 15 years ago, and they were kept in strict confidence. I cannot say enough superlatives about this book. It is a powerhouse in a very quiet way, and it is a voice that we have never heard come forward with these allegations. In this case, a successfully retired businessman, very well educated and very well traveled. I think it's a potential crossover book into major popular culture, and I hope you'll read it. Tim.
Yes.
I was about to say I'd like to hear more about one of the other books that you mentioned, and then I thought, wait, I'm in control here. I can go to my list here and say, Tim, would you prefer to talk about your experience this year of reading Paradise Lost by John Milton, that pop culture classic, or Dreaming in Cuban, which is one I remember being stuck on the book cover when I saw it when it came out. Very different books off the top of your head.
So this year I read 35 books, but Paradise Lost I've had on my to be read shelf for a decade, and
Beautiful.
I'm like, it's just been there for a very long time. But if you're going to read Paradise Lost, read the version that has the Doré illustrations, which are just freaking absolutely wonderful. And you listen, Paradise Lost is a classic. There's a lot of great stuff in it, but like it's very difficult to read that because the spelling is all very old English and it's all very phonetically correct, but your brain has to do these somersaults to get through it. And I'm dyslexic. It's hard enough for me to read it as it is. Yes. And then you're introducing things that are spelled wrong. It's very, very hard. But I did get through it. It is on the list of shit you're supposed to read in life. So I made it through. Dreaming in Cuban is not on anyone's list of things to read. However, it is in fact very good. It's about a woman and her relationship with her mother at a time that people could leave Cuba, and it spans generations. Why people go back, why people stayed, and it's a mother-daughter relationship thing, and it's quite lovely, and it's a very, very nice book. Dreaming in Cuban is a lovely book.
And they use, as they used to say on the Sunday morning political shows, and Tim Marenko, you have the last word. Thank you all, Marla and Scott and Greg and Steve and Tim, for joining me this night on our last night of the year for this show. Dear friends all, we'll keep reading. We'll do shows like this more in the future. Next week's guest is Mr. Donald R. Schmidt, UFO historian, best-selling author, and UFO scholar, to discuss this past year in UFO UAP activity and the coming year. We'll be doing our show on January 2nd. Stay well, fight for what you believe in, and be kind to each other. See you next week.